Kathryn, how did you know her?
Isn't this crazy? Our guest today, Kathryn Fishman-Weaver, you'll hear this in the conversation, and it's worth mentioning again. She and I met not through our time in Oakland, although we both worked in the Oakland Public Schools and not too far from each other. And in fact, I think the assistant principal that I took over for at Garfield became her principal. And so when we both started working in the Columbia Public Schools, we quickly discovered, oh my God, what a shared path that we both had, and now we're both here in Columbia.
And now it makes me like, clearly Kathryn and I are cousins or something.
No doubt. No doubt. Although
the amount of overlap that you and I had.
And then worked out in Oakland. Well, here's another crazy thing about Oakland and Columbia. My first year as a teacher at Derby Ridge Elementary School, I'm in the main office, 7 in the morning, 7:30 in the morning. And I'm making copies for something, and the secretary is not present, and somebody walks in, and I have my back to them, and they say, "Hi, I'm here to substitute," and I turn, and it's Rosa Morales. She and I taught at the same school in Oakland at E. Morris Cox on 98th Avenue down by International Boulevard, and she was a kindergarten teacher. And now she was living in Columbia, Missouri. Her husband was a professor of Spanish literature at the University of Missouri. And so they moved with her son, Ivancito. I guess her husband was Ivan. And it was amazing. And so we got together a few times. It was just wild. So small world kind of stuff.
That's so fascinating. It's just amazing to see the overlap. I'm fascinated. I actually have a question to start. What is a lab school? You guys talked about it very offhand. Like, there's not many lab schools left. I'm like, what the heck is that? I don't even know what a lab school is.
I would say it is a school within a university setting. And so a number of universities used to run their own, they still run, a lot of them run preschools. And then they also ran full K through 12 lab schools, laboratory, to try new ideas and different teaching methodologies with the children who attend.
But how different are we talking? Like what are some of the innovations that you see at a lab school that you wouldn't necessarily see at a traditional K-8 school or K-12?
Yeah, so I'd say maybe out of the lab schools came multi-age classrooms or an emphasis on, like a Regia Emilia in the early years or things like that. So in her case, it's a holdover in the term, I think, the term lab school is that it's at the university, and if there's a professor who may be studying something, they may try some things at that school. And so
interesting.
It becomes like, a lab school. And in her case, her lab school it's virtual, and there are hybrid opportunities where kids actually attend school in person and have teachers in their classroom, and they're interacting with university hired professionals who are a world away. And then there are also opportunities for kids to be taking courses that may not be available to them in a rural community or even within their own suburban communities that they take as a synchronous or asynchronous course. They were our lifesaver in a lot of ways because they knew how to do this work. And instead of us trying to figure it all out, we hired them during the pandemic, particularly for elementary. And then particularly when we were coming back in seat and there were still families because they may have had individuals in their homes who had comorbidities and they were really, for every good reason, worried about their child coming home and bringing home something, that they enrolled in Mizzou Academy and the school district paid for it so that they still got a really high quality education while they were still taking courses from home. And boy, was I glad I knew, because I was like, oh, you know what we need to be doing? Let's call Kathryn. Let's do this.
Once again, the number of connections is helpful, right? This is the networking that we keep saying over and over and over and over. Like the more really keep saying hi to people, keep saying keep connecting to people. Such a powerful tool.
It is such a powerful tool. Absolutely, it is. My favorite story about the lab school is he has now passed, but the former owner of the local paper, who was in his 90s, and he and I sat down.
Local paper in Columbia?
In Columbia, Missouri. Sorry, yeah. And he and I sat down for lunch. He was a force. And so you really talk about connections and making sure that you were on the right side of decision makers, of those who were writing their opinions and could sway opinion. Yeah. And so Hank and I sat down and he said, why can't the public schools, we were 19,000 kids and the lab school has not had a couple hundred. Why can't they be more like the lab school? And I'd say, I could imagine you were a more homogenized group. And he'd say, oh, no. We had diversity. We had some kids coming off the farm. I was like, okay.
Is there any difference between a lab school and some of the online programs that are available for students to basically get through high school online?
There are some that do it as a real for-profit and are not high quality. There are others that have really worked hard to try to create genuine coursework and access where it has not existed in their communities. So that's pretty cool. The University of Missouri does a nice job with their Mizzou Academy. I would say, though, if I can broaden the question, because just staying out of just the virtual piece, do you have to be a lab school to innovate? And the answer is no.
No. In fact, I just left. I mean, I'm in Arkansas, leading a cohort of principals here in Arkansas, in Central Arkansas, and we were just talking about HIFITs and adaptive leadership, and innovation or experimentation is one of the key pieces of it. And the issue, part of it's like the answer is no,
right?
And inertia, fear.
Well, goodness. And the level of comfort for the status quo. But how about this? I know you're going to tell me more about your time in Arkansas, and I want to actually hear about that on the back end, if that's all right. So let's and see just if you can figure out how to weave what you're doing right now, and then what we heard in terms of Dr. Kathryn Fishman-Weaver and her work around heart-centered leadership.
Heart-centered.
It's so awesome. So
it's super fun. It's really, really amazing.
You're listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. I'm Peter Stiepelman.
And I'm Jamie Amansang.
And we'll see you in a few minutes.
Imperfect leaders. Are you facing challenges filling open speech-language pathologist positions within your district? Kind of a silly question, because I know you are. MPAT Speech understands the critical need for qualified professionals in your schools. They recognize that communication lies at the heart of academic success, and that's why they're dedicated to helping you bridge the gap by offering expert therapists and innovative telehealth solutions. Don't let open positions hinder your students' success. Partner with MPAT Speech today and ensure every child in your district has access to the speech therapy they deserve. MPAT Speech, EMPAT Speech.com. Empowering students, empowering schools.
Today on An Imperfect Leader, our guest is Dr. Kathryn Fishman-Weaver, an associate teaching professor at the University of Missouri and the executive director of Mizzou Academy. Kathryn, welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
I'm so happy to see you. Well, it is truly, I mean, for those who are listening, Kathryn and I we've crossed paths professionally for close to 20 years. I mean, we both worked in the Oakland public schools at around the same time, even working with some of the same people, but we didn't know each other until we both were living and working in the same school district in Missouri. And I still think truly like that's a very strange, it's an amazing coincidence, I would say. But now that we live very far apart, but we've remained connected, and your job at Mizzou Academy, when I think about connections, is all about that. It's about connecting learners from all over the world. And so I wonder if we could maybe start there. Tell us a little bit about the school that you lead.
Oh, well, sure. It's one of my favorite things to talk about.
I imagined.
Mizzou Academy, it's a K-12 lab school at the University of Missouri. We don't have a lot of lab schools left in the country, so I'm proud to work for a school that is thinking about doing school differently. We're housed in the College of Education and Human Development. We try to support students as learners and leaders in our classrooms and our local communities. Our broad vision is to reimagine education with our global community, and we get to do that every day. Currently, we serve close to 7,000 students. Our programs include online, blended, and co-teach classes. We work with local kids. We work with international school projects and partnerships. Over the last 3 or 4 years, we've served kiddos from 60 plus different countries. And that global reach has just been incredible for me as a leader and learner. I learn something new every day that, with hope makes me a more effective leader and teacher and human being. Our team, we're passionate about expanding access, and access is complex. So we work with students who live in rural communities where they might not have the same access to advanced placement courses. We work with students who are navigating medical needs. A traditional public school might not be a good fit for their treatment. We work with districts who are looking to fill kind of a specific access gap like computer science or world language. And then we get to work with international schools that want to expand or launch a new global program. So, I guess like school leaders everywhere, every day is interesting, surprising, challenging, and really rewarding.
So if I remember correctly, you have, I know 60 countries. I can remember Vietnam and Brazil were very large ones when it first launched. And I think you probably have maintained really nice relationships there. And unlike what some may be thinking about in terms of virtual learning, children actually go to their high schools or they go to a local school, and then your program has actually space in their schools. And so children they're not isolated at home, which was one of our biggest concerns and what we're all trying to sort of recover from after the pandemic, but rather kids have connection with each other. They're also engaged and enrolled in a U.S. high school where they're learning with their teachers either virtually or in person. Did I capture that right? Do I remember that right?
Yeah. So that's our co-teach program that you're talking about. And I'm so proud of the co-teach program. If you were to visit one of the classrooms in our co-teach program anywhere in the world, and now we actually have some in the US as well, it's like a classroom anywhere else. You go in, there's a teacher, they're working with their students, they're collaborating, there's group work, there's peer review, they're building things. You wouldn't necessarily know that there was an online component unless you were there on a day when maybe one of our faculty zoomed in, or it was a summative assessment day and they go down to a computer lab, or some of our schools have one-to-one and the students submit their assignments to us. But short of that, it would feel like classroom as we know it anywhere, with really great curriculum and really caring teachers.
If people want to learn more about Mizzou Academy, where would they find you?
So I would go to the Mizzou Academy website, which is in the University of Missouri College of Education and Human Development.
Okay. Because I have met superintendents from all over the country, particularly as you were describing rural communities and wanting to provide incredible opportunities for children and not necessarily having the teachers to be able to do that. This might be a really great opportunity for them to consider how they can expand their offerings and really, be that benefit and that asset and that value added for their communities. I want to talk about a book that you recently wrote. You wrote Wholehearted School Leadership. I loved it. By the way, I felt so privileged to have had an advanced copy. The book promotes values-based approach to school leadership, emphasizing courage and justice and learning and connection. And so you do that. You offer reflective exercises. Can you tell us a little bit about your book?
Well, first, thank you. It was such a rewarding experience to write this book in ways that I didn't even imagine necessarily. So when I joined the Mizzou Academy team, which was 10 years ago this September, which feels impossible, I was finishing my PhD at the time. And so I was really immersed in sort of the research community. And I recognized immediately that I was part of something different in education. And so I sort of set this goal 10 years ago that someday I wanted to write about some of the lessons I was learning at the school. And the time felt right to start to share some of these stories. And the book builds on research that I conducted during my dissertation, which was on wholehearted teaching, which is this sort of the same thesis around courage and connection and stories and relationships. But it translates that work to leadership and to leadership in this moment. So what does it mean to lead when we are more globally connected than ever before? What does it mean to teach as we look at the challenges in our local and global communities? What does it mean to lead and leverage technology that's developing more rapidly than any of us can keep pace with, including our students who are faster than we are? And so when I got kind of the green light to write the book, I don't know what I expected exactly. Like I expected, I guess, to share some of those lessons. What happened, though, in the process of writing the book is that I was reminded that everything important that I've learned in education, I've learned from somebody else, from our students, from our teachers, from our families. And so I felt this tremendous gift to get to hold these stories kind of up to the light and to share what they've meant to me. And that gift was the most meaningful part of getting to write this book.
One of the things I think leaders do understand is the power of story, the power of language, whether it be framing or metaphor or personal stories, to help a community understand what it is they believe, their principles, their values, their beliefs, but also just in terms of where they hope to go as a leader of that community, of that school district. I wonder if you have a story that comes to mind from either your own experiences or from those that you have held and cared for and been the custodian of that might help others kind of think about their own stories.
I think that stories are the shortest distance between people. I think about stories as being sort of that connective tissue that holds us all together. My team knows me more deeply because of the stories that I've shared, about my family. So personal stories. And as you share personal stories, they're multi-layered. So, for me, that looks sharing about our interfaith traditions, sharing about elder care, sharing about foster and adoption. It also looks like getting to know each other as like fun, cool human beings.
Yeah.
So the team knows that I'm passionate about expanding access to swimming and that I like to play mahjong.
I didn't know that. That's cool.
It is cool. But, and that work matters, right? That work of humanizing each of us is important. More important, I think, than the individual stories, though, is the space to share who we are, like this idea of being fully human. And, like anything else in schools, that doesn't happen by accident.
Yeah.
I try to write story sharing into our agenda to create space, not for me to share my stories, but for me to learn from the stories of other people on our team.
Right.
And all of that's an action item too, right? What do you do with those lessons? So sometimes it looks like a book recommendation or checking in on, how is someone's mother doing? And the more we write that into kind of who we are together as a school, the more we become what I really think a team is.
Well, I want to emphasize something that you appear to be saying, and because story, if you're not careful of the context of how you're telling a story, it can actually maybe close down connection and close down communication. I remember as a principal and certainly as an assistant soup in a soup, walking in classrooms and seeing narrative writing and the brainstorming. And sometimes you could see that the personal story just didn't connect with the audience. The children were like, I don't know anything about going scuba diving on a vacation to Hawaii. Thanks, teacher. That makes no sense to me. When a teacher would use story in terms of family celebrations or mourning a loss, those are universal stories that connect us and bring us together. And I sense that from reading your book and in conversation with you is that it's the story as a vehicle for these greater themes of friendship and understanding and reconciliation and love and all those types of things that really connect people. Does that resonate?
It does, absolutely. And as I think about, leading in, we serve 7,000 students a year. So leading in this large space, as I think about the
multilingual space, a multi-ethnic space, a multicultural space. I mean, wow.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. And as I think about, so one of our goals, as a school system a few years ago was to make sure that every student in our school community was well known by at least one adult in the community. And so we did a lot of different ways to kind of slice that apart to make sure that every child in our school was known. And as I think about what that knowing looks like, what can you hold on to in such a big space? What we can hold on to are stories. So I think about Junior sharing what he learned from his grandmother about the women's rights movement in Brazil. I think about a fifth grader talking about what she learned gardening with her uncle. Like those give us those places where we can truly connect as people, and we can hold on to those relationships as we learn and grow together.
If you're just joining us, our guest today is Kathryn Fishman-Weaver, the executive director of Mizzou Academy. Kathryn, I mentor and I coach leaders using a human-centered school transformation model, and the model emphasizes this shift away from a focus on what I call active negative data, this perseverating over what isn't going well, and also moving away from traditional sort of conveyor belt education. And instead, it prioritizes collaboration and positive connectedness and harvesting the wisdom of others and shared leadership, among other things. And it reminds me a lot of your work. As I read your book, I was like, my God, these could be packaged together, these things. In your model, you write about and advocate for shared leadership and how really it's a partnership and that requires a balance of power and a belief in the community. And so would you talk about that a little bit and what you mean by that?
Yeah, I'd love to. So as a philosophy, I think that shared leadership teaches us that the most important ideas for school or district improvement should come from our school communities. One of my core beliefs is that wisdom is ubiquitous. So too is leadership. So we were just talking about prioritizing personal stories. And I think that's really about prioritizing people and leveraging community wisdom. And so as a school leader, I feel that I have a responsibility not only to trust the expertise of our community, but to actively seek it out. And this came up for me in the book, as I was talking about the gift of these stories and how everything important that I've learned in education or leadership I've gotten to learn with someone else. And as I think about the stories that I'm most proud of and the projects I'm most proud of, they're all teacher-led or student-led.
When I was looking at your book, Community Wisdom, as you just mentioned, right? The wisdom is ubiquitous. You mentioned talking about saying yes. And I think that is rooted in what you described as trusting your community. You talked about distributed leadership. You talked about student agency and having the opportunity to make independent choices. Anything coming to mind in terms of all these different things that I was like, yes, this is what deeper learning looks like, is when you give students agency.
So in the book, I write about a foundational story at our school. So this happened 20 years ago. One of our teacher leaders proposed what, to the best of our knowledge, is the first online AP course ever to be approved by the College Board. And the work to move from proposal to approval, as you can imagine, was tedious and difficult. And the reason I share this example, although I wasn't working at the school then, is because that story is a defining story for our school. And as we think about what does it look like to leverage community wisdom, to learn from stories, that work doesn't only happen in the present moment. I feel like it's also about really identifying what are your defining stories. And so as we share and celebrate the story of her advocacy to bring AP online, that's a story that teaches us about the power of saying yes, the power of advocating on behalf of the best interests of kids, the power of venturing bold ideas, even when you can't yet see what that path is. And so we get to continue to learn from those defining stories, even now, 20 years later, as we're trying to navigate what does it look like to teach and lead in the age of AI, for example. We can still take lessons from those defining stories. And I feel like that's an important piece of community wisdom as well. And I'd love to share with you about a student-led project too. I think that this story won't surprise you because, as you shared in the introduction, we've known each other for a long time. So you know that I love student showcases. I remember holding one in the central office where you were superintendent. So the story I want to share is about a recent student showcase that we got to lead as a school community. And this happened in Brazil. I had the great fortune of spending a couple weeks in Brazil working with our partner schools there. And while we were there, we hosted what for us was an inaugural event. It's an action research showcase for high school students. And the theme was the United Nations SDGs in the age of artificial intelligence. So it's a big theme for young people. And as always, they went places with the prompt that I couldn't have imagined. Their projects were just incredible. And so let me give you an example of one. And this is one of 30 amazing projects that we got to learn from. So there's a student duo. They're high school juniors. They live in an under-resourced neighborhood in São Paulo. And these two young people are really passionate about sustainability. And as they look around their community, they know that waste management is a challenge for their local community. And as they're exploring how can they make a difference in this challenge, they learned that many people in their community didn't know what could be recycled or composted or what was waste. And further, they didn't know where to go with all of these different categories. So these two young people designed a solution. They created this huge machine and they programmed their own AI to be a solution. So we got to use this while I was in Brazil. And how it works is you put your waste on a tray. The machine, the AI that they've created, identifies whether it's recyclable, compostable, or needs to be waste. And it tells you in Portuguese. And then there are bins attached to this machine and you can put your waste where it should go. It's going so well that their school has now adopted this as their waste management solution. And they had plans to expand to more schools and to more communities. And that alone is amazing. One of the things that I've been continuing to think about since I got home is a conversation I had with the students about their project. And they said, you know, Kathryn, when we started this, we thought it was a sustainability project. We thought this was, all about recycling. And the more we got into it, the more we learned it's about literacy and it's about poverty. And all of these pieces are connected. And I was just struck by, man, that is exactly what we want young people thinking about. Like when we talk about interdisciplinary connections, it's that. When we give students the opportunities to lead and when we encourage their leadership and when we learn from their leadership, all of us get to make connections that are surprising and that I think can make the world a better place.
Can you tell me a little bit more about literacy? How is it connected to literacy?
Yeah. So in the community where these two young people live, the literacy rates and just access to education are really challenging. And so as they got working on this project, they learned that it was really an education issue. So if there were materials available, they were written and those were not always accessible.
Oh, I understand. Gotcha. That's probably a lot of learning and a lot of imperfectness as well. And so actually, why don't I ask you that question that I ask every guest? How does the term an imperfect leader resonate for you?
Yeah. Well, I could anticipate this question because I listened to your podcast. The term has grown on me and I like it more and more all the time. When I first heard it, I had what I think is by design, this dissonance of, whoa, that's not how we normally talk about leadership. What I love about it is that it's real. It kind of reminds me of, to use Michelle Obama's phrase, that we're becoming, right? And it's this constant process of becoming. And so it also makes me think about, so what's the next step? So if we can acknowledge that we're all imperfect, which there's power in that, then what comes next? And so how can we problem solve? How can we lead? How can we create solutions together? What are the conditions that we need to hold to be both effective and admittedly imperfect? And so I think about things like grace, like healing, like repair. And I think about how much those are needed in schools and in our communities.
And we'll be right back. Hey, district leaders, I know you already know this. In schools worldwide, cell phones are posing real challenges on student engagement and mental well-being. And I want you to meet Yonder, a proud sponsor of An Imperfect Leader. And let me share this story from a visit I made to some schools in Silicon Valley. I asked some kids what they liked about Yonder, and after some funny looks, they shared that actually, with Yonder, teachers don't have to battle with them over phones anymore. In fact, one kid said to me he didn't have to worry anymore about his parents texting him in class, and the kid next to him sort of shoved him and goes, "Texting? My mom used to FaceTime me in class." I want to introduce you to a support system that increases teaching and learning. I want you to discover why 1 million students choose Yonder daily. Minimize distractions, maximize learning potential. To learn more, go to overyonder.com. YONDR.
We're back for segment 2 of An Imperfect Leader called Imperfect Leadership in After Action. And our guest today is Kathryn Fishman-Weaver, the Executive Director of Mizzou Academy and also author. In this segment, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision that they made, and then we talk about it. So what happened?
In the 23-24 school year, Mizzou Academy was asked to take on a huge project for the State Department of Education. I'm going to do a little context setting so you can understand sort of the environment. So in 11 months, we wrote and produced a 30-course online library for childhood professionals across the state. It was amazing. I work with the coolest, smartest, most compassionate people. So half of these courses were revisions, pretty radical revisions of courses that had existed previously, and then half were brand new on topics that we all agreed to. And we could and probably should have done an after-action review of each of the courses. But for this one, I thought I'd talk about the one that went the most off the rails.
You're very brave, and I really appreciate it. You're living your value of courage and learning, and so here we go.
Okay, thank you. All right, so this course was a child development course. It was one of the redeveloped courses, so that meant that another version kind of existed somewhere in the universe, and that other version was done by an outside team. So I connected with them. I asked their leaders if they would be interested in working with us or helping to lead this project to develop an online version. And they told me that they thought an online version would be useful for access, but they didn't have the capacity to write or produce it, which is great and just fine. And so they sent over a course description and some learning targets for us. And I assigned one of our top curriculum writers to develop the course. She got to work. We got an outline. It was approved by the state. A few months later, she'd written a full script. I sent the script back to those two leaders, for approval and to make sure that we were on track. And they didn't like it at all. And they were really quite mad about it. And then our curriculum developer was super hurt. And then everything came to this halting standstill. And I knew that I had some real work to do and that obviously I'd missed something big. And I didn't know what it was yet. I asked them if they could share some specific things they would adjust it. I said, we want to get this right. And they sent over some kind of terse notes. And I personally partnered with the curriculum writer. I was like, we will do this together. We put together another draft. We were really thoughtful in that drafting. And we sent back the next version, and it was received even worse.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. The frustration was palpable. And so at this point, I did something I should have done months ago, which is I called for a synchronous meeting. We're going to all come together and we're going to really talk things through. We're not going to use, digital tools of email and that kind of thing. We're going to see each other face to face. And I remember when I went into that meeting, it felt similar to facilitating a tense IEP. Like that was sort of the emotional temperature of the room. Voices were raised. We were told we'd missed the point. We were told that the drafts were taking this tremendous amount of time to review and they weren't that good. It was really intense. And so what I write about in the book, I don't tell this story, but I do write about the moment when things started to change. And so what happened is I apologized. So I took ownership of all of us being in this situation, and I meant it. I felt a tremendous responsibility for all of us being here at this table in this really tense moment. And I shared that I couldn't change what had happened, but I was committed to finding a way forward together. And I wanted us to produce a course that we could all be proud of. And I wanted to really understand what success looked like for everyone around the table. And in that moment, you could feel the temperature in the room start to change. So I asked if we could please start again. And I asked what ended up to be a really important question. And one of my big takeaways here is I asked, how had the original course been created? And what we got to hear next was this incredible advocacy story. So the two leaders who had written the original version of the course that's taught in person shared about working with vulnerable families. They shared about partnering with a national health organization to create this statewide model for developmental tracking. I learned that this course had been a passion project of theirs. It was deeply moving. And I told them, that is so inspiring. And as I'm saying, this is so inspiring, you can feel the temperature start to change again. And things were heating back up. And they said, well, how could you not know this?
Sounds like you're about to get to the moment that got overlooked. How could you not know this?
Yeah, we are. And I think that moment is layered. And so they said, they sent over all these resources. And I said, well, we got the course description, we got the learning targets. We've been using those to guide our work. And they said, well, what about the curriculum guide? What about the resource manual? What about the teaching videos from the National Health Organization? And I hadn't seen any of these things. And I wanted to be really careful because we just built this very delicate bridge. And I wanted us to stay on the bridge. So I pulled up what we had. And after some awkward navigating, we learned that some files had been uploaded to Google Drive, but then they hadn't been shared with us. And so that could kind of be the end of the story.
Yeah. So here's the thing that I'm thinking about is, and you're doing such a nice job of really painting the picture, because I think often we go into these difficult conversations and we think we can just quickly move forward and we can see the temperature go down in the conversation. And then we are not always prepared for how it's going to spike again. And it sounds like what spiked was this misunderstanding of what they perceived to have been shared with you and your curriculum developer. And that was completely omitted from your understanding because you didn't have it. And so there was a big part there. Yeah. So would you have said that what got overlooked was between the first iteration and the second iteration that there was that disconnect? You felt it, but didn't fully understand it?
So I think sort of the easy answer is what got overlooked is the resources, but I think that's the wrong answer, or at least it's incomplete.
Sure.
I think what really got overlooked is that we should have had this synchronous meeting at the very beginning. What got overlooked. I didn't take the time to understand the origin of the course and what it meant to the original writers and to talk together about what success was going to look like.
Right. That shared image of what will is successful. I mean, yes, we're responsible for these 30 courses. Your course is right now the most important thing for us. And how do we have a shared image of what success looks like? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Huh. What did you learn about relationships?
I learned that origin stories always matter. And so when I could better understand how much this course had meant to the original two writers, it changed the ownership that everyone that was working on that course had. And that's a lesson that I think about now. Every time we ask, a new coordinator to take on an existing program or a new teacher to take on an existing course, like this is the work of teaching and learning, and it is emotional.
Oh, that's so powerful. Yeah. It's like almost the metaphor of a relay race, a baton being passed, and hearing its origin story as a way to care for this. As you mentioned earlier, when we were talking at the beginning about being the custodian and carefully holding on to people's stories to understand, same thing for something that they created. What frustrated you?
I mean, being kind of blindsided by everyone being frustrated is never fun. And it happens to school leaders, in some intervals. And so I'm thankful that I could have the clarity to recognize when that happened, that I had work to do, that I could get out of my own head quickly enough to try and get us back together. Although my first attempt wasn't successful, by that second one, we had made progress.
Yeah, so I imagine you left that meeting. They said, we'll make sure you have access to those documents now. And then you had to send another version. And can I expect that sort of starting to get closer towards what they had hoped to see?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had the resources. We sent the next version, and they loved the next version. And the story doesn't stop there. It could, but it doesn't. And so I was so happy that they loved the new version. And I did too, actually. I'm really proud of this course. And when it came time to produce and film the course, I asked those two writers if they would share that history and advocacy story on video as part of the course. And they said yes. And it's an amazing moment in the course. And also, I got to go with the film crew and be with those two leaders in this really pivotal moment as the course is moving from an in-person thing to an online course. And then later, the course went on and it won an award. And those two original writers are the folks that we asked to receive the award. And I won't forget them showing up for that awards night. And they were beaming, and we'd finally created this course that we were all super proud of.
Oh, I have chills. I mean, that's a real testament to your leadership, too, to be really thoughtful and wholehearted in terms of knowing how much it meant to them, and then how easy it is for leaders to step forward and accept an award, and how much more meaningful and impactful it is to step back and allow those who were the originators, the original authors, to be recognized for their work. And I think likely, well, we didn't say this, their legacy was under attack, was jeopardized by that first iteration. At no fault of your curriculum writer or you. When you're missing some important information, that certainly is going to create a very different outcome. So what a lovely story. You really wrapped that up. What in the end was something that was good that came out of this. Can I also assume that as you have then moved forward with the other 29 courses, that there was a sort of a pause to say, what do we know about the origin story of this course and who was responsible for it?
Absolutely. Yes. And that work has continued in curriculum projects today. It was a really powerful lesson for me as a leader and for all of us who work on curriculum at our school.
So I think about this for leaders who are listening, superintendents who may say, well, I don't do curriculum writing. You do lead strategic planning. And sometimes you come into the school district, you have a mandate from the school board to do certain things, and you begin to lead a strategic planning process for the next 3 years or 5 years without giving credit and honor to those who came before you and the work that they had done. And not just the leaders. They're not going to take it too personally, but all those teachers and community members who came together, and staff members and student voice who were part of the original plan or the previous plan, who would like to know that their work was not, that their work mattered, that their work was important. And then how do you build on, that idea of standing on their shoulders so that you're now projecting or presenting a vision that is honoring of the past? Because we all want similar things for our children.
Yeah, 100%. Authorship and agency always matter. And I think it takes a lot of thoughtfulness around authorship when we're co-creating, whether it's curriculum or strategic planning. I have some strategies that I use to try and hold myself accountable for authorship and agency and giving credit. I'll go through periods of time where I look at shared documents that we're writing and I bold all of the names in the document so I can see, how multi-voice this is and where to give credit, but also so I can see the gaps, right?
Absolutely.
Language arts teachers overrepresented? Do we have voices that represent our geographic and cultural and linguistic diversity? Are those names bolded too?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's been really helpful for us as a school community.
I love that. Yeah, that is really powerful. I think about the superintendency that I had the privilege to lead and to think about there are certain communities that absolutely will be the first to step forward and say, I'd like to contribute my thoughts on this idea or this project. And there are often communities that historically have been underrepresented because they've been historically and intentionally omitted. And so why would I get involved? It's unlikely that you would care. And so I love the fact that you highlight for who is involved and ought to be recognized and who is not there so that you can potentially right some past wrongs. Kathryn, can I also ask you a final question, which is, what advice would you give to an aspiring leader?
To get really clear on your core values, both individually and as a school community. And those may be a little bit different. So to name the values, to have clear definitions on what they mean. For me, my core values are belonging, courage, justice, and learning. Those are guideposts in the Wholehearted Leadership Framework book. In our school system, our core values are inclusion, innovation, access, and partnership. Every member of our school team can name those values. The shared definitions we author together is the most referenced document that our team uses on a daily basis. And I just think that when you put in the work to get really clear on your core values and what they mean, that can become your most important compass for navigating all the decisions that school leadership requires.
I so appreciate that. Not just the being really clear on your values, spending that time to define them so that there is a shared image of what they mean, because they can mean radically different things for people if you're not really clear. So thank you so much. That's great. Our guest today was Kathryn Fishman-Weaver, the Executive Director of Mizzou Academy. Kathryn, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for reminding us about the importance of connection, the idea of wisdom is ubiquitous. Truly, you shared so much wisdom here today that I can't wait for our listeners to hear it.
Well, thank you so much.
We're back, Peter. What do you want to talk about? Which part excited you the most? I got one that excited me the most, but so obviously you know her and that comes across, right? So what was something you're like, oh, I didn't think about that.
Oh, that's so interesting. Well, first of all, you're right. I know her. Kathryn left the school district, and it's really the time where I got to know her even better. And that was kind of interesting. And even most recently, she and I have been working on a grant to provide virtual speech language pathology services, so SLP services, for children who are in foster care. And when she talks about heart-centered leadership, she truly is all in on that. Not only is she an educator, she's an educator who's worked with children with exceptional needs. She's worked with gifted services. She's worked with children who are twice exceptional in terms of both gifted and receive special education services. She works to teach swimming. That is so interesting to me. And then she really works so closely with the foster care community in providing services, training, trauma-informed training. And so I think when you say what's something that I didn't realize how they were all connected, all of those interests for her. And then that helped really propel her into this world of heart-centered leadership. And so, and then when she talks about how you have to be really clear on your core values, I asked about, what's something you would, advise to aspiring leaders. And I'm more and more really reaching out to those leaders I get to advise and asking from the very beginning, tell me your core values. And sometimes it's a list of like working assumptions about how they do the work. And I'm like, oh, no. I want to know the 3 or 4 your core values. And you and I have talked about core values before. Yeah. It's becoming more and more important, particularly as leaders do this work right now in this time period in our lives, about being really clear and being really centered on your values, because that's what's going to really lead to whether or not you believe that you can be successful in the community that you're leading.
All right. Well, then this is an interesting idea I want to share with you. And that I love, this is my favorite part of my favorite line of the whole thing. I bet you it's going to be other people's favorite lines as well, but it's going to be obvious. I liked it when she said, I think that stories are the shortest distance between.
That's my number one. That's my number one.
Far.
Right? I think about stories as being sort of that connective tissue that holds us all together. I can't believe that you had that also. But of course, it was one that we all, listening to this conversation, I love it. Yes, totally.
Later on, she says, origin stories matter. That when I could better understand how much this course, and this is from her after action review, of course, when this course had meant what it had meant to the original two writers, it changed the ownership that everyone that was working on that course had. And that's a lesson I think about now every time you ask a new coordinator to take on an existing program or a new teacher to take on an existing course. And it makes me think of, I wrote, my own thought was like, well, when our colleagues don't listen to us, it hurts. To be honest, it had me thinking about I had this group of high school friends, even before high school, elementary friends, like childhood, toddler friends. There are 10 of us, and we've known a number of us have known each other for our whole lives. That friendship is bound by origin story. It's just one long, every time we see each other, it's a repeat. We tell the origin stories over and over and over again because they mean so much to us.
It's like
because
before written language, the oral histories of don't forget who we are and what we believe and what we value and how we're connected and why that matters. I love it.
So I want to link it back to your concept about values. Is that a value? This line of, I think stories are the shortest distance between people. Is that a value?
I'd say the value is the power of story and human connection.
Yeah.
And then if it were boiled down to one word, maybe it's human connection or storyteller. Human connection. There's a hyphen in there.
Exactly. Like I've been a million times. People says I spelled it wrong. And I'm like, well, if you put a hyphen.
I know. It's a hyphen.
The algorithm.
Storyteller. And then you say, why storyteller? And you say, it's a value for me because I think that stories are the shortest distance between people.
I loved that. And what a great after action review reflection of the miss. In fact, it led me to a different.
How many people have you worked with? Right, this after action. Sorry to interrupt you again, as I always do. But how many people have you worked with that would have just said, "We did this for you. You didn't like it? Then see ya." And she just kept coming. Okay, I think we missed something here. And you know what? We need to actually sit down in person, like synchronously, and quit it with the emails and this other way of communicating. Let's sit down and figure out where we're missing each other. What happened? And then it revealed itself. Oh my God.
It was so good. I mean, it did have me wondering this, though, related to stories being the shortest distance between people, that when the origin story is heard and perceived to be understood, people get in alignment and agreement much more quickly. But without the story, you're guessing, right? This is what happened. She said it, well, we didn't get all the information. Yes, that helps. For sure, that helps. But I guarantee if they got all the information, they still would have been rejected. I believe they would have been rejected because they didn't have the origin story. And it was the origin story that mattered.
Yeah, it's possible. It may not have gotten the same level of what I would consider vitriol. It may have said, look, we appreciate you. You obviously have read the materials, but there's a miss here. And,
sure, exactly.
And then I'll use another one of her quotes as she takes this step back and says, as a philosophy, I think that shared leadership teaches us that the most important ideas for school or district improvement should come from our school communities. And I'll tell you why I think that matters is because this next part. One of my core beliefs is that wisdom is ubiquitous, and so too is leadership. And I was like, yeah. I mean, it's just like, how do you make sure that you are harvesting that collective wisdom? We use that phrase quite a bit in our work that we do with others, and she certainly is living that. Like, obviously there's something missing here. So how do we then engage, include, and empathize with what you're essentially giving up? You're giving up the soul you put into this work, and you're giving it to us to be the caretakers. And we didn't appropriately recognize and honor that.
We didn't listen, right?
Or we didn't.
Or we didn't ask, right? We didn't ask. We didn't think to ask. We were like, okay, thank you. Great. We'll get it done and look at our work. And isn't it amazing? And without the story, without the story, you're going to guess wrong. Guaranteed. Not you might get it wrong. No, you will get it wrong. Why? Because my brain's not yours. That's it. It's not like you're mean-spirited. It's that's what a lack of cultural sync or not being culturally responsive is. It's the fact that even with God, me and you, like even with all of our similarities and overlap and everything, we are two different people who find ourselves going, well, that doesn't mean that. And we have a ton of overlap. And it still is hard. You go any further little bit of distance and it's over. You have no idea. And so the origin story matters a ton. And all of the stories, but the origin story is like, why do you care about what you care about? Why this? I love it.
Let me tell you, at least my last thought on our conversation.
Yeah.
I loved how when they were honored with an award, that they were intentional about having the original authors receive that award.
Yeah.
That was so great. It was so great. And I'm sure she didn't even think about it as a strategic thing. It's heart-centered leadership. She just thought, of course, Of course we're going to have the people who are responsible for this be recognized publicly by our community. Oh, that's so great. I was like, oh man, I wish people did that more often.
Can I make a personal connection to that?
Please do.
This is what stood out so strongly in my head. I was sharing the story today too about, and I've said this in the podcast, like, my grandfather went to Stanford and all this stuff, but he was one of 9 and he's the only one that went to college. The only one. The entire Almanzan clan are Stanford fans. Everybody wears Stanford sweatshirts. One dude went to Stanford, but everybody's wearing them. There's all of my cousins in East LA have these Stanford sweatshirt and shirts. They're all figuring out how to go to the Rose Bowl when Stanford was in the Rose Bowl. It's bananas. And it's only because the reason why my grandfather got to go to Stanford is because these people, his origin story is rooted in these other people. These people sent him to Stanford as a representation of them, that his accomplishment is as much as their accomplishment and that the award should go to them. I thought that's
very special.
Saw my family and I was like, oh my God, that's why everybody.
That's a really special story. And that's really special.
Thank you. I'm very proud of it. Very, very proud of it. And it's why when it came down to even getting a chance to go to a graduate school one night, Stanford was an option. There wasn't even though I'm like, I got into Columbia. I was real excited about New York. I'm like, I should go to New York. New York's going to be great. I'm not going to New York. I'm going where my grandfather went, where that would make my grandmother most proud, that would make my mother proud, and more people in my family would wear a Stanford sweatshirt as a result.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Can I ask one more? I thought one more thing. Something you said. Basically, you said superintendents who would get hired, and we're like, I don't do curriculum well. I don't do curriculum writing. And you said you do lead strategic planning. And for the next 3 to 5 years, without giving credit and honor to those who came before you and the work that they had done, and not just the leaders, that you've got to give credit to the people who've put the previous plan in place. And so it had me.
Because it's not just the leader who put it in place. It is also they convene. If you look on those first pages, it talks about how many faculty, staff, community members were involved in the process. And to walk in after 3 years as a new leader and say, you know what, that was good work, but you know what, we're going to do better work, is such a rejection. You've already just shot yourself in the foot.
Exactly. I wrote down these questions. You're starting as a superintendent. Here's what I think you should ask. What's the origin story of the district you're working in? Who were they before you and who do they want to be?
Those are great questions. Those are really great questions. Sometimes we talk about getting a beat on the system and doing interviews. Those are 3 super simple, essential, get to the heart of it questions.
To me,
those are
your comment made me think of those questions. I'm like, I don't think as a superintendent we're going in thinking like, I don't know. I'm just not thinking about that. I'm trying to do those things,
right?
But the question itself helps me focus. And so, who is this? What is their origin story?
Well, and here's the thing that it makes me think of. It makes me think of the fact that superintendents, while in so many ways are politicians, they are not politicians in this sense. Right. Because a politician says, everything that came before me, I represent change. And you don't want, are you better off now than you were 3 years ago? No, right? So bring me in. And a superintendent has to apply Kathryn Fishman-Weaver's heart-centered leadership, which is to say, I value and honor the work that has been done before me. I stand on their shoulders, and we may do some things a little differently, all in pursuit of the same goal, to serve this community well.
We can do something differently because of the efforts that have been put into place prior to me.
We wouldn't be here today if it weren't for their efforts. And those who are going to follow us boy, we sure hope they look back on us and say thank you for putting them in such a great position.
And on that note, that's the best line. That's great. End there.
You've been listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. If you've got some thoughts about how you would answer any of those 3 questions that Jamie just asked, put it in the comments. We'd love to have those. And more importantly, we'd love to have those 5 stars.
That's so true. That's so true. I truly would love the answer. It was quite to hear what superintendents think to this.
I know people think about them. I just wish they'd type them. Type them, for God's sakes. Jamie, have a great week.
Yes, indeed, Peter.
Music for An Imperfect Leader was written and arranged by Ian Varley. Sam Falbo created our artwork, a wood print inspired Daruma doll butterfly. Remember, imperfect leadership is not a scarlet letter. It's a badge of honor. It recognizes that serving as a lead learner is about being a vulnerable leader, an empathetic leader, a compassionate leader. We are proud to be imperfect leaders, so join us next time for another episode of An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast.